I waited almost 2 hours at an expensive restaurant for our anniversary while holding back tears and pretending everything was okay. I kept checking my phone, refreshing messages that weren't arriving, telling the waitress that my boyfriend David was just stuck in traffic. I'd gotten ready like it was the biggest night of my life. New dress, hair done, makeup perfect, because 3 years together meant something to me. I had even finished paying off his car loan last week, a huge financial stretch I made because he promised things would eventually get better for us. When the clock hit 8:45 and I was 5 minutes from walking out, David finally walked in, not alone, but with four of his friends, all loud and already half drunk. The moment he reached my table, he pointed at me and said loud enough for half the room to hear, "See? Told you she'd still be here, waiting like a loyal little puppy." His friends burst into laughter. One of them, the one I always disliked, commented, "She is well trained." I felt my face burn with humiliation. David sat next to me, grabbed my cheeks like I was a child, and said, "Relax, Georgia. You weren't actually expecting something romantic, were you? We're heading to a poker game after this. I just had to make sure you're handling that next payment." The server arrived and asked if we wanted to order. David smirked and said, "She won't need food. She's watching her weight." They laughed again while I sat still, feeling myself shrink inside. I asked for another drink, pretending nothing was wrong, pretending I wasn't collapsing in front of everyone. When I excused myself and stepped into the bathroom, I stared at my reflection for a long time. Not crying, not shaking, just empty. 3 years of excuses, 3 years of paying bills he said he'd cover later, 3 years of being the stable one while he bounced between jobs and blamed every boss, every coworker, every situation. I was done. I wasn't going to scream or make a scene. I was simply finished. I opened my phone and scrolled through the saved audio messages from David. Hours of him mocking his boss, insulting his parents, bragging about how much I paid for him, bragging about manipulating people. I had saved them without knowing why. Now I understood perfectly. I texted my friend Michael and asked if he could pick me up in 10 minutes. I walked back to the table, smiled at everyone, and pretended to take an urgent call. Before leaving, I paid only for my 2 drinks and told the server David and his friends would cover the rest. I stepped outside, blocked David's number, and got into Michael's car. I wasn't crying, I wasn't breaking down, I was planning. Because David had trusted me with everything: his passwords, his emails, his cloud backup, his banking app. He thought I was harmless. He thought I was his safety net. He thought I'd always stay. This morning, my phone showed 78 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. But he didn't know I was already packing his belongings into garbage bags and deciding exactly where they were going next. And he definitely didn't know what I had done with those voice messages. That part would come later.
When Michael dropped me off at my apartment, I still wasn't crying. It was like my body was in shock, like it couldn't decide whether to collapse or scream. I walked inside, sat on the floor, and suddenly everything inside me cracked open at once. I cried into my hands for almost an hour, not because I missed David, but because I finally saw how much of myself I had allowed him to drain without realizing it. Michael brought ice cream and stayed with me, letting me talk about every red flag I had ignored. The jobs he lost because he was always late, the angry voice messages he sent whenever someone told him no, the way he blamed everyone for everything while I paid bills, rent, food, and most recently, his entire car loan. When he finally left, I sat alone with a list of every digital account I had access to, and even I was shocked at how much he had given me. His email from when I helped him reapply for jobs, his cloud account saved on my laptop, his banking app for the car payments, his social accounts, his shared music plan, his streaming services. Basically, his entire online life was under my fingertips, and none of it was illegal, none of it was hacked. Everything was access he personally handed to me because he never remembered passwords and always needed my help. I barely slept that night, and when morning came, I had already decided exactly where to start. The car payment I'd made last week hadn't fully cleared yet, so I called the bank and explained I needed to reverse the transaction due to manipulation and misuse. They asked for proof, so I sent screenshots of conversations where David admitted the car was his alone. I even sent a voice clip of him bragging to Michael that I was basically paying for everything while he focused on big dreams. When the bank agent came back and said they were freezing the payment and opening an investigation, it felt like the first breath I had taken in months. While doing that, my phone lit up nonstop with calls from strange numbers, David using friends' phones after realizing I'd blocked him. The voicemails switched from angry to pleading and then back to angry again, the same pattern he always used when he lost control. Around noon, I opened his email out of curiosity, not planning revenge, just needing to know what else he'd been hiding. What I found made my stomach drop. There were threads between him and his friends planning the entire restaurant joke. They had been laughing about it for days, calling it the anniversary prank. One message said, "She won't leave. She never does. She's desperate." And then there were messages with another woman from his work, flirty, late-night exchanges, photos, jokes about after hours, invitations he never told me about. Nothing explicit, but enough to make every insecurity I'd ignored punch me in the chest at once. I made myself coffee, spilling half of it because my hands were shaking so badly, and opened his cloud drive where he stored voice recordings. I found one where he and his friend were laughing about how I was basically his personal credit card, and he was just keeping me around until someone better comes along. My ears were ringing, my chest felt hollow, and that moment is when I knew exactly what I needed to do. I forwarded the recordings where he insulted his boss to the man himself with a simple message saying, "You deserve to hear this." Then I forwarded the recordings where he mocked his parents to their own phones without a single added word. After that, I logged into our shared accounts, changed passwords, removed devices, and canceled subscriptions. It felt like cutting strings one by one until I no longer felt tied to him. By the afternoon, I was stuffing David's clothes into garbage bags. No folding, no sorting, just scooping years of entitlement, yelling, manipulation, and financial burden into plastic. I was halfway through when someone knocked on my door, and my heart jumped into my throat. I checked the people and saw David standing there with the bouquet of flowers, like a cheap apology could undo everything. I stepped back, held my breath, and didn't make a sound. He kept knocking, calling my name, pacing, sliding notes under the door saying he needed his stuff for work and that he was sorry if I took the joke too far. The man who humiliated me in public was now begging through a closed door. After 20 minutes, he finally left, and I returned to packing with more determination than ever. By evening, every single piece of him was in trash bags lined against the wall, waiting for their destination. When my phone pinged with a message from the bank confirming the reversal was approved, I laughed. An actual relieved laugh. And that's when another message from him came through from a different number. "Why is a tow truck outside my apartment? What did you do to my car?" I didn't reply. I didn't need to.
His choices were catching up to him all on their own. The next morning, I woke up to this soft scratching sound at my front door, like someone was sliding paper across the floor. When I checked the camera, I saw David sitting outside on the hallway carpet, looking like he hadn't slept at all. His hair was greasy, his shirt was wrinkled, and he was busy writing on little torn notebook pages. Every few minutes, he pushed one under my door. I gathered the notes later. There were 8 of them, each more pathetic than the last. "Please talk to me. I need my stuff. My boss is furious. My parents won't speak to me. My car is gone. Just let me explain." The version of David sitting there begging was nothing like the man who smirked at me in that restaurant, like humiliating me was a sport. For a split second, I felt a sting of guilt, but it disappeared as soon as my mind replayed him squeezing my cheeks like I was some obedient pet in front of his friends. I made myself a cup of instant coffee, the emergency kind I hate, and sat on my couch scrolling my phone. I had 90 missed calls from random numbers and 20 voicemails, mostly rambling apologies mixed with threats and excuses. I deleted all of them except one, from his mother. Her voice was trembling as she said she didn't know what to believe, but wanted to talk, and that she was sorry for anything her son might have put me through. I saved that one. I wasn't ready to respond, but something about her tone felt real. Around noon, I checked my door camera again and saw David was gone. But then another familiar face popped up, his friend Eddie. He stood there, shuffling awkwardly, then said loudly through the door that I needed to stop dragging things out. He acted like he wasn't there at the restaurant, but I watched him laugh when David made fun of me, so hearing him pretend he had no idea was almost comedic. When he left, I packed an overnight bag and went to Michael's place, because being alone in that apartment while David was spiraling didn't feel safe. Michael made us sandwiches, turned on some trash TV, and let me sit there in silence until I was ready to talk. I finally told him about the emails, the messages with that girl from work, the recordings on David's cloud account making fun of me, his parents, his boss. Michael looked like he was ready to drive to David's place and break his nose. When things calmed down, I checked my bank account and nearly screamed. The reversed car payment had already gone back into my balance. The timing couldn't have been better. Later that night, I created a temporary Instagram account and went to check David's profile. It was public, of course. His newest post was a dramatic paragraph about losing the one he loves and being judged unfairly, which made me roll my eyes so hard I almost gave myself a headache. The comments were full of people asking what happened. One girl from his work, probably the same one from the emails, commented, "Call me?" with a sad emoji. His cousin wrote, "Mom says pick up her calls." And then a message popped up on my phone from a mutual acquaintance, a guy named Eddie, who wasn't even close to me. "Hey, can we talk? David says you hacked him." That was the last straw. I called him right away and calmly explained everything. What David did at the restaurant, how long I waited, the recordings, the planned humiliation, the cheating, everything. Eddie was silent for a full 10 seconds, then just said, "Holy shit, he lied to all of us." Apparently, David had been telling their whole social circle that I was unstable, controlling, and financially manipulative. Hearing how deep his lies went made my stomach twist, but it also made everything suddenly click into place. He wasn't just cruel, he was constructing a version of me that excused all of his behavior. The next morning, Michael came with me to my apartment. I wanted to check if David had tried to get in. There were more notes shoved under the door, but this time the tone had changed completely. Instead of begging, they were angry. "You're ruining my life! You'll regret this! I know what you did!" The irony was almost funny, considering the only reason his world was falling apart was because I finally stopped absorbing all the damage for him. I spent the day deep cleaning my place, moving furniture around, opening windows, burning a candle that David always said gave him a headache just because I felt like it. I threw out the bedding we used to share because it made me nauseous looking at it. I hung a painting I bought months ago, but never put up because he said it looked too childish. Every small change reminded me this apartment was finally mine. Later that afternoon, I checked my email address and saw something unexpected. An email from David's workplace HR department. They said they were investigating a professional conduct concern and asked if I was willing to provide any voice messages he had voluntarily sent me that involved work-related behavior. That was it. No pressure, no accusations, just a request. I forwarded 3 voice clips where David complained about skipping assignments, calling his boss incompetent, bragging about leaving jobs early, laughing about ignoring safety rules. I didn't add commentary. I just sent exactly what they asked for. That night, David posted something cryptic on Instagram about unfair workplaces and people trying to tear good men down. I almost laughed. Everything he was losing, he handed over himself. All I did was stop shielding him from consequences. The next day, I was grabbing groceries when I turned the corner and nearly ran straight into his mother. She froze, then asked quietly if she could speak to me. I thought she was going to yell or defend him, but instead she said she was heartbroken after hearing the recordings, and she thanked me for telling the truth. She admitted she and David's father had been sending him money for years without knowing he talked about them like trash when they weren't around. I didn't tell her about the cheating or the humiliation plans. Some things parents don't need to carry. She hugged me before she left. I didn't expect that. When I got home, someone had left a small Amazon box at my door. Inside was a Starbucks gift card and a note from my neighbor saying, "Thank you for getting rid of the loud jerk." I didn't realize how much noise David made when I wasn't home, but apparently everyone else did. By the end of the week, I had blocked 3 new accounts David created to try to reach me, changed my phone number, and updated every password I had. I was finally starting to feel like myself again. And then, that morning, a letter arrived from the car finance company confirming the loan had been terminated by fraud and the vehicle had been repossessed with no further action required for me. A weight I didn't even realize I'd been carrying slid off my shoulders. Michael called to check on me and asked if I felt bad. I thought about everything for a long moment and realized I didn't. Not even a little. David destroyed his own life with his own choices. I just stopped cleaning up his messes.
3 days after the dinner disaster, everything suddenly exploded at once. I woke up earlier than usual because my phone wouldn't stop buzzing, even though I had changed my number the day before. This time, it was messages from friends of friends, people I barely knew, all asking some version of, "Are you okay?" or "What really happened?" Apparently, David had been telling everyone I had suffered some kind of mental breakdown and that I lashed out by ruining his life. According to him, I hacked his accounts, stole money, destroyed his property, and spread lies about him because pregnancy hormones made me unstable. Pregnancy hormones. He tried to say that about me. I don't even have kids. The level of desperation almost made me laugh. Michael was on his way over, and he showed up with coffee and a box of pastries, like he was preparing for battle. He sat at my kitchen table, listening while I scrolled through messages. People were confused, some angry, some apologizing for believing him too quickly. Then I got a text from Damon, the same mutual friend who had called me before. He said the whole friend group was fighting because half of them had heard the voice clips, the emails, the truth, and the other half believed David's ridiculous meltdown story. He said Jake swore he was going to fix everything, which only made Michael burst out laughing because Jake was the one who egged David on in the first place. Later that afternoon, I got a call from David's mother. She sounded exhausted, like she hadn't slept. She wasn't crying this time, but her voice was heavy. She told me David had shown up at their house the night before, yelling and slamming doors because they wouldn't take his side. His father told him to leave after he shoved a chair across the room. She said she didn't know what was happening to him and that everything felt like it was falling apart. She said she wasn't asking me to forgive him, but she wanted me to know she didn't blame me for any of it. I thanked her and told her I hoped she and her husband were okay, and then she whispered, "I'm sorry you ever met him." That sentence stayed in my head for the rest of the day. That evening, when Michael and I left my apartment to grab dinner, we saw a familiar figure sitting on the curb near the parking lot, hoodie pulled low over his face. It was David. He stood up the moment he saw us, and for a second, everything inside me froze. He looked horrible, like he hadn't slept or showered in days. He walked toward me saying my name over and over, but Michael stepped between us in 2 seconds flat. David kept insisting he just wanted to talk, that he missed me, that he needed me, that he was falling apart without me. It didn't even feel sincere, just panicked, selfish desperation. When I didn't say anything, his tone changed instantly. He demanded I give him the car back, demanded I tell people I had lied, demanded I fix what I had done. Michael told him to leave before someone called security. That set David off even more. He shoved his hands through his hair and started pacing like he was arguing with himself. Then he looked at me and said, "You think you're better than me now. You think people won't realize what you are?" The shift was so sudden it made my stomach twist. Michael pulled out his phone, and that was enough. David backed away, muttering something under his breath before jogging off toward the street. I stood there trembling, not because I wanted him back, but because I realized just how unpredictable he really was. We went back upstairs, and I called the building office first thing. They made a note on my file and told me if he tried to come back inside without permission, they'd call the police. I changed my locks, again, just in case. After Michael left, I sat in my living room with all the lights on. just listening to the quiet. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like space I finally had for myself. The next morning, I got an email from HR at his job saying that they had concluded their investigation and that appropriate action had been taken. They didn't say exactly what that meant, but a few hours later, I checked his Instagram again and saw that he had deleted every post about work. Instead, there was a messy rant about fake people and loyalty. The comments were brutal. Half of the people were dragging him, the other half were confused, and one comment from Amber, the girl he'd been messaging, simply said, "We're done, don't contact me again." So that relationship clearly imploded too. That afternoon, my neighbor across the hall knocked on my door. She's usually shy, barely talks beyond hello, but this time she came to thank me for removing the human foghorn, because apparently David used to blast music and scream at his games whenever I was gone. She handed me a small potted plant as a housewarming gift for my new peace and quiet. I actually laughed for the first time in days. That night, I curled up on my couch, wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea. For years, I had imagined what leaving David would feel like. I always pictured it as messy, dramatic, heartbreaking. But sitting there in my quiet apartment, with no chaos, no yelling, no constant tension running under my skin, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. Real, heavy, permanent relief. And the more his life unraveled publicly, the more I realized it wasn't my revenge that ruined him. It was the truth finally catching up to him. Everything he lost, he handed away piece by piece. All I did was stop cushioning the fall.
It's been almost 6 months now, and sometimes I still catch myself expecting David to show up out of nowhere, but he never does. Life feels strangely quiet in the best way. My apartment looks different now because I rearranged everything, added new lamps, new art, new small things that make the place feel like I finally live here instead of just surviving here. Michael still checks in on me every few days, usually bringing snacks or some dumb meme that makes me roll my eyes. He's been my anchor through all of this, without ever making me feel like I owe him anything, just someone who stayed when everything fell apart. After the mess with David settled down, I started putting together everything I had left financially. For 3 years, I drained my savings, covering bills David promised he'd help with one day, covering his car payments, covering job losses, covering every lie disguised as a setback. But the crazy part is, when he was gone, I realized I wasn't actually as behind in life as he made me feel. Without his expenses draining me, I finally had room to breathe. I set up a little savings account and started putting away the money that used to go straight into his disasters. Watching it grow, slowly but steadily, felt like reclaiming pieces of myself he had taken from me. Every few weeks, I'd hear something new about David from a mutual friend or someone connected to his workplace. Last I heard, he had bounced between 2 couch surfs and eventually ended up staying with some guy he barely knew. His job situation didn't improve. Apparently, HR found more issues than just the voice clips, and he wasn't exactly welcomed anywhere after everything came to light. The Mustang he bragged about constantly was sold off at auction, and because it sold for less than what he still owed, he now has a leftover balance for a car he doesn't even have anymore. When I heard that, I didn't feel happy, but I didn't feel guilty either. It just felt like the natural result of how he lived. Amber, the coworker he had been flirting with for months, blocked him after she found out he was messaging girls on Tinder behind her back. She sent Michael a message asking if I was okay and admitting she had no idea he was capable of treating someone like that for so long. I didn't respond, but a small part of me hoped she wouldn't repeat my mistakes. His mom reached out again a little while ago. She apologized, not for him, but for the fact that she never realized what he was really like. She said she and his father had tried to help him for years, only to be met with constant disrespect and manipulation. She told me that she hoped someday I'd find someone who actually deserved me. Hearing that from her felt strangely comforting, like a final piece of closure I didn't even know I needed. A few weeks after that, I moved to a new apartment across town. It's smaller, but has huge windows that let in warm afternoon light. I bought myself a ridiculous fuzzy blanket, some plants, and a bookshelf I still haven't fully organized. On my first night there, I sat on the floor eating takeout and realized it was the first time in years that I felt genuinely safe. Then there was the weird part. Out of nowhere, David's brother reached out to me on Instagram. He apologized for his brother's behavior and said he never agreed with how David treated me. And then, as if the universe was testing my patience, he asked me if I wanted to grab dinner sometime. I blocked him in record time. I didn't even hesitate. I refused to let another version of the same chaos into my life. I added up everything I spent on David over the years once. Rent, the car payments, the bills, the emergencies that magically always needed my money. The number made my stomach drop. I could have traveled, I could have saved more, I could have done a million things. But instead of feeling bitter, I felt free because I will never spend another dollar, another night, or another tear on someone like him again. A few days ago, while sorting through my closet, I found the dress I wore the night of the restaurant disaster. I almost threw it out, but then I stopped. I'm keeping it. Not because it reminds me of him, but because it reminds me of the moment my life changed, when I finally chose myself. Now my days feel simple in a way I haven't experienced since before I met David. No walking on eggshells, no feeling responsible for someone else's chaos, no bracing myself every time my phone buzzes. Just peace. Sometimes loneliness, sure, but the good kind. The kind that gives you space to grow. I'm planning a trip soon, my first solo one. Michael keeps joking he's installing a tracker on my suitcase because I have the navigation skills of a confused pigeon. But I'm excited. It feels like the beginning of something new, something mine. And if there's one thing I've learned from everything, it's this. People don't suddenly become the worst version of themselves. They were always that person, hiding behind charm and promises. And when they finally show you who they are, you have two choices: stay and shrink, or leave and rebuild. I chose to rebuild. And for the first time in a long time, I am genuinely proud of myself.